excellent job on one campaign video. I think I wanted to thank Chairman McKeon for letting us use his committee room here today. I think it's quite appropriate to be in the Armed Services Committee room, as Greg will talk about some of the national security implications involved in addressing hunger. We're going to have a number of speakers, as you know, and then we're going to open up for questions so that everyone can, in fact, participate in this discussion. What I'm going to try to do is just provide a bit of an overview as to the issue of hunger and some of the other elements of a comprehensive approach to addressing hunger. A lot of our discussion with the panelists are going to focus on some of the new elements that have been brought to the table under Feed the Future, how we're helping to address the hunger suffered by, as I said, the 400 to 500 million small-scale farmers. But first, let's talk about hunger. I mean, around the world, there are about 925 million people who suffer from hunger on a daily basis. Those are the people who are caught up in a natural disaster, whether it be an earthquake in Haiti or a tsunami that hits Asia. People fleeing civil conflict, either within a country, displaced within their own country, or across borders. There's about 100 million people make up that category of those put into an emergency type situation. There's pregnant women, there's new moms, infants, there's children who spend their days searching for food instead of going to school. And there's about, as mentioned, about 400 to 500 million small-scale farmers, primarily women, who work 7 days a week trying to fend for and generate food for their family, living off $1 a day. But it's more than just a set of numbers. I mean, sometimes when you talk about numbers, 900 million, a billion people, you lose sense of what it really is, and these are real people behind all these numbers. And as I was coming up here this morning thinking about how to actually communicate the reality behind a number like 925 million, I was thinking about this young boy I had seen in a camp, and he was, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and someone had placed him up next to a tree. He was actually too weak to stand up and walk. You could actually see all of his ribs, and he didn't even have the energy to wipe the flies that were landing on his face. I mean, that's the face of hunger. That's real. I was also thinking about this little baby I saw, must have been 3 or 6 months old. She was in a clinic because her mom hadn't had sufficient nutrition to actually produce milk to feed this little baby. And she was in this clinic, and as you know, you need little round babies, you put your finger, they grab your finger and all this, and she didn't. She just kind of lay there and looked out. And I found out later that she actually died. I mean, that's the reality of the 925 million. And there's even a looming threat on the horizon. We're now seeing food prices skyrocket again. Last month were record levels, cost of food around the world. 2008, when we had similar spikes, there were riots across the world. I hope we don't end up in a similar situation this year, but there are serious threats on the horizon. But in spite of these threats, in spite of the reality of the 925 million people, I think this is a moment of great promise, of great hope, of real opportunity. Why? One is the issue of global hunger is now on the agenda at the leader level. From the inaugural address to the G8 meetings, G20 meetings, our President, our Secretary of State have put the issue of global hunger on the agenda, and it is now an issue that world leaders are grappling with. In addition to that, we're now talking about a comprehensive approach to hunger. We've always done a great job in dealing with immediate needs. We've always responded to emergencies. We've run great school feeding programs, but now we're actually looking at some of the underlying causes, some of the long-term ways that we can break the cycle of hunger and poverty. It's an incredible moment. It's also an amazing moment in that we, all of us together, for the first time I think ever, are standing together. The entire NGO community is together. The business community is standing with us. Fortune 100 companies looking at ways to enhance nutritional products, ways to help smallholder farmers get to access to markets. It's governments, not just U.S. government, not just developing country governments, but also governments in developing countries around the world, all together. It's the U.S. military. One of our best spokespersons on this issue is the Secretary of Defense, who has often talked about how it's more intelligent and actually cheaper in terms of blood and money to deal with these issues than to put troops on the ground. It truly is a unique moment. And this strategy that Greg is going to lay out in more detail, the U.S. government strategy, was in many respects developed by all of us. You had, believe it or not, Bill Gates and Howard Buffett actually designed a cornerstone of this strategy. I think Bill Gates has done a pretty good job in designing software, and this is another way that everyone is coming together around a collective effort to address global hunger. The NGO community has been meeting with folks from the day the administration came into office, sharing best practices, ideas, concerns. The GAO has weighed in with specific recommendations. It really is, this strategy really is all of America's strategy, and everyone, I can say, I think without hesitation, that the entire NGO community, the entire business community, everyone is united in full support for the Feed the Future strategy, for the administration's overall global hunger strategy. As I said, much of today we're going to talk about this new piece which I don't think we've had a commitment to agriculture development, access to markets like this since the Green Revolution. A lot of our discussion is going to focus on that today. What I wanted to do just to start off is to focus on what are the overall elements of a comprehensive approach to hunger. Because as I indicated at the outset, there are a lot of people impacted by hunger. So there's four, and Kate just gave me 2 minutes, so we're going to run through this in about 1.4 minutes. There are four interrelated categories. The first is the emergency response that we mentioned, to deal with those in urgent need. And you can see, you haven't seen, we haven't dealt with famines in the last number of decades because we've done such a good job in addressing emergency needs. And in that regard, I mean, I want to mention a lot of what we do in addressing emergencies, we provide food. And there is a deep, deep connection between the American farmer and feeding people overseas. My good friend Rod is here. Rod is a farmer from Kansas. Why is he here? Because he feels strongly that that's what we do as Americans, is we help feed people around the world. In addition to the emergency response, there's nutrition programs that ensure that those, especially vulnerable populations, have access to the essential nutrients and calories to ensure that they develop properly. And in this regard, we all know, and it is now universal agreement, that the first 1,000 days from conception to year 2 of a child is critical in ensuring that they develop properly. If they're not provided the required nutrients and calories in that first 2 years, there's irreversible damage. We now all agree, and there's specific target interventions focused on that. The third category is safety net programs, to ensure that there's a minimum level of food security, to ensure that those on the edge don't fall over the edge and thereby require emergency assistance. There's an incredible program that could fall into this category, nutrition category, the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education program, which provides food to hungry children in schools in the world's poorest countries. It's an incredible program in that it not only draws kids into school and increasing attendance and enrollment and academic performance, but provides essential nutrients to them in the school setting. And finally, this whole area of agricultural development, market access, which is, as I said, so incredibly exciting. And 2 points. One, U.S. leadership has already caused over $18 billion in commitments from countries around the world. And there's another tool that's part of this, a relatively new tool that is also very important, and it's the Global Agricultural and Food Security Trust Fund, which is a vehicle by way where we can actually garner the commitment and support and resources of countries around the world and foundations to help also address some of the needs, infrastructure needs associated with the agricultural development efforts. 2 final points. One is the effort to address global hunger has always had strong, deep bipartisan support. I don't care whether the administration was Republican or Democrat, there's always been strong bipartisan support. And the same is true for the United States Congress. Second, we are today going to talk about the economic implications of hunger. We're going to talk about the national security implications of hunger. But I firmly believe that we, as Americans, stand up to address the issue of hunger because it's the right thing to do, because it's part of who we are as a people. So thank you. I want to now introduce Greg Gottlieb, and I've been told I shouldn't read the bios but just give the title because all the bios are up front. Greg, who has served for many years as a really dedicated public servant in the area of food security, is currently the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator for the newly established Bureau for Food Security. Very exciting, and thank you very much, Greg, for being here.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. I've just returned from a long stint overseas, and when I was here before, when I left overseas to go overseas in 2008, I was part of the task force on food security. So to come back in 2010, 2011, and be part of what I think is a heightened sense of where we are and where we need to go is a real pleasure. I think when this was going to originally begin, it was a much smaller group, and I think Gail Smith from the National Security Council will be here. And Gail and I, we don't look anything alike. But I think the size of the crowd is evident that this is an issue that is grabbing people. A lot of people, I'm sure, have seen in the papers recently a number of articles on food prices. I'm sure that is one of the things that captures people. Krugman in today's Times has another take on it. What's gone on in Egypt, what's gone on in Tunisia, these are all some parts of what is happening there is due to increasing food prices. And concomitant with that, we also see countries buying up more food, large stocks of food, which is another thing that indicates to us something that's going on. One thing I do want to keep in mind is that, as Rick points out, there is a renewed government commitment, not just from the U.S., but from all donors, on food security. That's LAKILA, $22 billion commitment to food security over the next 3 years. And that, I think, is the real key to what we want to talk about today. That commitment and the U.S. government's commitment to see that through. So let me just start by saying that hunger, poverty, instability, while hunger and poverty might not topple a government, it certainly is and has played a factor in some of the things that we've seen in the streets recently. What we have to keep in mind is that while we see the political aspects of it, when we see rising food prices, what we're really thinking about is what is the impact on that nearly billion people who are most vulnerable. That's one of the keys that we have to keep in mind, because there's a variety of ways, not just feeding people directly, a variety of ways to address those issues. We know that food price volatility can get people into the streets, but what we really know is that I think it focuses our attention on the problem. And the difference, I think, between 2007 and 2008, when prices of food and oil were spiking high to record levels, is that while they may not be at those levels just yet, I think we are in a much better position now to begin to address those issues. Agriculture is a key driver, and perhaps the key driver, for economic growth. According to the World Bank, it's probably it's about twice as effective in reducing poverty as investments in other sectors like manufacturing and mining. And that, I think, has been something that we forgot for many years. We had the Green Revolution in the 60s and 70s, and in USAID and other places, we stopped investing in agriculture and agricultural research because we thought we had the problem licked. And as we can see now, that's really not the case. From a national security standpoint, as Rick has pointed out, Secretary Gates, General Petraeus, Admiral Mullen have all come forward and said how important it is that we tackle the issue of development and around that issue that we particularly tackle the issue of hunger. So what we are trying to do in the USG, USAID, and elsewhere is really begin to make that long-term commitment to do this. And most importantly, I think one of the differences between now and a few years back is that we are looking at this program, this issue, with all the linkages. Rick mentioned nutrition. That is a big part of how we want to tackle this issue. We want to make sure we have the right micronutrients. We want to make sure that our nutrition programs are strongly linked with our agriculture programs. And I think that video is a really good one when you look at the issue of sweet potatoes. The nutrients in a yellow and an orange sweet potato. I also want to point out that the President has, in his new policy guidance on development, has expressed it in a way that brings together our national security interests in not only having people not be hungry, but in real economic growth, which not only benefits those populations that we seek to serve out there, but benefits our own economy as it opens it up so that we can we could have more markets and have a stronger economy here. And I think Florencia will talk a little bit about that later. Feed the Future builds on a 50-year legacy of USAID in agriculture and serving and bringing life-saving interventions to populations. Again, USAID never got out of the agriculture business, but if you go back to 2008, that was the smallest agricultural budget we'd had since almost USAID started. We are now trying to move ahead to a much larger budget, we hope. And through Feed the Future, the President's initiative on hunger, we're working with governments, multilateral institutions, NGOs, private sector partners, and others to accelerate inclusive agricultural growth through improved agricultural productivity, expanded markets, as well as focusing on the root causes of undernutrition and hunger. The strategy for Feed the Future recognizes that food security is not just about food, but is closely linked to economic security, environmental security, and human security. In November, the Administrator created a Bureau for Food Security. This Bureau is going to drive our food security efforts from a strategic point across the interagency. But I want to emphasize what I think is an important point about having a bureau. USAID is structured around bureaus. If you look at our Global Health Bureau, it is a powerhouse in the field of global health, whether it's dealing with HIV/AIDS, whether it's dealing with nutrition, mother and child health. The point about a bureau is it represents a long-term commitment by the U.S. government and by USAID to deal with this problem. It was evident back in 2008 that we were not making that commitment, and not just the U.S. alone. Other donors as well have done exactly the same thing. I think the Bureau represents us being out ahead on this problem, and we see that other donors now are coming to us and talking to us about how we have put this together. As Rick said, we are always going to be a government that provides food assistance. I have a long background in food security. Some of my colleagues are here. I've outlived many of them already, but probably almost 25 years in emergency. So I know what a feeding program, emergency feeding program looks like. And I think that commitment is always going to be here for the U.S. government. But I think this food security initiative is key because it represents having to do less of emergency feeding and having people provide more for themselves. And the way we want to get at this, I think, is a little different than we've looked at it in the past. As I said, we want to do this in a more comprehensive way, but in terms of the partnerships that we develop, that will also be key. We want to work more closely with the private sector than we have in the past. In the past, the relationship has been one of working with private sector foundations. We put up a little money, they put up a little money, and we do a project together. This time around, I think we want to look at more at economic growth, real economic growth. so that when we work with corporations and ag companies, we're not just doing it from the sense of their foundations, although we will, but also what's the profit-making motive for everybody involved, not just them, but also the farmers and the people they would serve. The other part of this is the equity issue. And this is a question that's come up since I've come back and spoken to a number of groups. This is not just about private sector having a benefit, but it's the issue of equity. And so we want to make sure that the programs that we put in place target those who are the most vulnerable and target the poor. And therefore, we want to make sure that civil societies groups are a main partner of ours, and that we make sure that we understand well and can best serve the needs of those who are most vulnerable. A little bit about Feed the Future and what I think makes it a little bit different. It really is about inclusiveness. If you look at the way these comprehensive investment plans are developed, for the first time the plans are not just about donors driving those plans, but about the countries driving those plans themselves. And those plans being looked at not just by us, but in the sense of CADA, objective teams to evaluate whether those plans make sense economically and socially. And the key to this has been the openness of the process of trying to do the plans. I'm sure somebody might raise their hand and say, but we were excluded from this or that. There are always going to be deficiencies in any process. But I think what's key here is that at the beginning of this, we open it up to everybody so more voices can be heard. And the point here from a national security standpoint for us is that the transparency of economic policies is key to a more open society and for everybody to participate in the benefits that accrue. We're also trying to look at it from the sense of advocacy and across a broad array of parts of this initiative. As I said, nutrition is a big one. The 1,000 Days Initiative that the Secretary and the Minister of Development in Ireland started. There's a major UN effort going on nutrition right now. And there's the CADP process, which continues to inform the way that many countries in Africa go about developing their agricultural programs. That is key for us. It's the transparency of that process. Rick also mentioned the World Bank Fund and the amount of money that's coming into that. I think that'll be, countries will put into that as part of this $22 billion commitment. So far, $321 million have been put into that, and 8 countries have received support already. The U.S. has committed $475 million, and we're confident that over the next few years it will meet that pledge so that other countries can participate, whether in the public window, and there's also a private window to provide credits and other type of funding to the private sector. I just want to point out one thing on the private sector. We are talking here today about the private sector engagement in food security. Where I just came from, Namibia, the private sector is also getting involved. And in fact, it's one of the first places where the private sector is leading a nationwide effort in Namibia to do prevention of HIV. They have applied, the Standard Bank has applied to be the lead donor, the lead implementer on a project through the Global Fund. So we're not just seeing it here, but we're seeing it all over, where the private sector is coming in a big way to help lead progress. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about monitoring and evaluation because it goes right along with what CADP is trying to do and what we want to do in terms of the openness of the process. We've got we've started off, I think, with a very good effort on monitoring and evaluation. It's been very strongly put to us by both the Hill and our own folks in the administration about why we want to do the types of monitoring and evaluation we want to do. Because we want to know that our programs are working, we want to learn from it, but also we want to make sure through the monitoring and evaluation that what we commit is actually accomplishing what we set out to do. And the support that we get to continue to do these types of programs only comes because we pay attention to the success of those programs. So let me just conclude. They didn't put a card up for me. I guess I'm from the government. They know I'll be long-winded. Results do not happen overnight. This is a long-term objective for us. Food security, this effort on sweet potatoes did not start just a year ago. It started a long time ago. So for us, I think what's important is that the commitment to the Bureau of Food Security and what our colleagues at USDA are committing to and what other parts of the government are continuing to do, that is important. What it needs is consistent funding to accomplish this, whether it's in field programs or whether it's in research. As part of Feed the Future, we have a number of countries that we want to look at where we increase our funding so that we can see that we can raise incomes and we can draw more people out of poverty. We hope that by doing that, we will be able to reach some of those MDG goals. And finally, and again, I'll talk about it, this comprehensive approach is what's important for us to deal with this over the long term. And it isn't just raising incomes. It is equity as we raise incomes. So thank you.
I'm going to introduce our three panelists who can either come up here or speak from there. You have mics there, whatever you're more comfortable with. But I have to just, I see our friends from Food for Peace over here. I have to say, I wasn't able to do this because Katie flashed the 1 minute before I had a chance, and that is what Greg is describing is an intelligent approach. And that intelligent approach has also been built into an expanded effort around our emergency response. And I have to give them some credit. What they've done over the last year and a half is to significantly enhance our capacity to get food to people quickly. So by pre-positioning more food based on early warning assessments, by diverting ships when necessary, by using in-country stocks, what they have done is gotten food to address an emergency much faster than we ever have before. In fact, in Pakistan, when the flood hit, it was 3 days before U.S. food hit the shores. It was an incredible effort. They've also expanded their toolbox to include cash resources for vouchers when there's food in the marketplace, and for local and regional purchase when it's faster and cheaper to actually buy locally. So I had to say that because it's really been a fantastic effort. Checks in the middle, I think he just said. If I may introduce, seated next to Greg, Florencia Cipriano is Mozambique's National Veterinary Director. And next to Florencia is Devry Bufner, who is Director of International Business Relations at Cargill. And then Jim McLaughlin, who everyone recognizes. He's probably run more campaigns and provided expert advice and guidance to more candidates than actually fill these halls. And what's most relevant to all of us is he's been with Tom Friedman doing a national hunger poll on an annual basis for years. And I'll wait to introduce the ambassador because you'll speak after our panelists. After our panelists, then we'll have an open discussion. So please, if you would.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everyone. And thank you for this invitation to share with you the impact of U.S. foreign assistance on transforming the poultry and feed grain sector in Mozambique into a major driver of poverty reduction and economic growth. I serve as a chief veterinarian for the government of Mozambique. And I'm here leading a group of Mozambican poultry industry representatives, which has been attending the poultry exposition in Atlanta and a poultry short course at the University of Georgia with support from U.S. foreign assistance. In 2005, our national chicken industry was on the brink of disaster. Avian flu in South Africa and a rise in the local currency sparked the crisis, but it was the dumping of Brazilian chicken that led to a 221% surge in official imports between 2004 and 2005. With the support of USAID, TechnoServe, an international organization working in Mozambique, developed an industry strategy plan with local stakeholders and support from Cargill, they found that the Brazilian chicken was entering Mozambique indirectly after sitting Middle Eastern supermarkets near or past expiration date and without paying import tariffs. Traders in Dubai had found a last resort market to dump the Brazilian chicken that couldn't sell to anyone else. TechnoServe secured additional resources from the sale of surplus agricultural commodities from USDA Food for Progress program to support a multi-year poultry industry development effort that included capacity building for small poultry producers, poultry companies, and government agencies. Matching grants to incent investments in biosecurity and a national advertising campaign to promote the benefits of local grown chicken. The program supported the creation of a National Poultry Association, AMA. The association provided a united front to voice common industry interests to the government and to the market to market the domestically produced chicken. In turn, poultry companies supported small producers called outgrowers around the country. TechnoServe also completed a comparative study of tariffs and non-tariff import requirements for frozen chicken around the world and made recommendations to the Mozambican government on regulations that would protect health and safety but not constitute a restraint of trade. Those recommendations were implemented. These results have been dramatic. The poultry program with USDA and USAID support has helped grow the feed grain industry from $15 million a year in 2005 to approximately $65 million a year in 2009. In 2005, there were 2 imported chickens for every 1 domestically produced chicken. Today, Mozambique broilers outnumber imports 3 to 1. National poultry consumption has had an annual growth average of 80%. The industry has created more than 90,000 direct jobs, including tens of thousands of small-scale farmers who produce soy and corn for poultry feed, plus many more in supporting industries. In 2009, the poultry sales alone generated at least $106 million as compared to $25 million in 2005, reaching a level above cotton and tobacco export put together. The growth of Mozambique's poultry industry has become a model for many other African countries that are seeking to develop their poultry and feed industries. By 2009, Mozambique's poultry industry accounted for 0.3% of its GDP. This figure could easily double in the near future if projected private investments are implemented. At least 2 of those investments are being made by American companies, facilitated by TechnoServe as part of this USDA program, including one in a large airplane operation in Nampula province. Today, the government works with AMA to continue to improve the environment for poultry industry. For instance, a credit line of approximately $620,000 with low interest rates was recently created through a partnership with a major bank to benefit poultry producers in the south of the country. The pilot has been quite successful, and this credit program will be expanded to producers in the rest of the country. However, There's still more work to be done. Future challenges include the continued increase on national soy production, the construction of new abattoirs in the country, and the reduction of live chicken sales, the improvement of access roads, and the creation of a national laboratory to support disease control and quality assurance. Without the assistance of U.S. government aid, none of this would have been possible. To all of you who have helped make this a reality, on behalf of the Mozambique poultry sector, we deeply thank you and hope that we can continue to partner with the U.S. government and organizations like TechnoServe in the future to create more market-led opportunities to build sustainable food security and economic growth for our country. I thank you all.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here. I know that the timesheet is going to go up, and I know there's something called a filibuster up here, so I'm wondering if I can use that to get through my speech here. Again, my name is Deborah Buchner, and I'm with Cargill. I just want to do a quick poll here because I know this is one of our first opportunities to have a chat with congressional staff and members, and I just wanted to get a show of hands of how many people here are working on the Hill and have come from offices on the Hill that are interested in learning a bit more. Great. Oh, great. Nice to see you. Well, today what I wanted to do is put the food security discussion in the context of our domestic agenda and also our development agenda here in the United States. And I want to focus my comments on why it's so critical that the United States remains active and engaged in global agriculture development, in the global agriculture development equation, and I want to try to do that from a private sector perspective, fully recognizing, Greg, that you mentioned private sector on the ground as well. But I'll try to put it in the context of a U.S. private company. And aside from the moral imperative that sits before us, I will hopefully provide you with a convincing argument as to why global ag development and food security should remain on the U.S. congressional and administration's agenda as a top priority. And I haven't heard it said today, so I just basically want to define how Cargill defines food security simply as it's access to calories, and not just calories, sufficient calories and the right kinds of nutritional calories that will sustain a person's life, not just today, but over their lifetime, so securing their food supply. And you know, most of you have probably heard of David Beckman and how he's dedicated his life to serving the poor and the hungry. And David has put this issue squarely in each one of our courts to make a difference for the hungry and the poor in our place of work. And actually, today we're all working here together on hunger and poverty, and I wanted to open up a page in his book, Exodus from Hunger, where on page 176 it says, make it your job. So make hunger your job. And if you're a teacher, it means educate your students. If you're congressional staff or congressperson, educate your constituents. And in the case of business, what David says on page 176 is that, quote, we aren't going to end mass hunger and poverty until some for-profit companies identify with the cause. We also need some business people and companies to be advocates in Congress on behalf of hungry people. Some businesses stand to prosper as the United States or developing countries reduce poverty. But even these businesses seldom help advocacy with Congress. So David's not here today, but I am. And David, we've heard you. And we are up here a lot as business on the Hill. And we talk a lot about the need and the merits of opening markets and trade flows and accessing investment routes, and as a key to development overseas. And I think it's one of our most compelling arguments as business is that what we do in terms of our business model and empowering U.S. business here also helps those develop overseas. And in the case of ag development, there's not any more true story. And I know right now here in the United States, and rightfully we're focused on the job situation. How are we going to grow our U.S. economy? How are we going to grow U.S. jobs? And that's really important while we have some immediate term solutions at the forefront, such as some immediate drivers like the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement or advancing the Trans-Pacific Partnership to get those markets open. We need to be thinking of those, but as Greg said, we also need to be thinking of the long-term solutions. I can see I'm going to have to filibuster. So, and those long-term economic drivers, and that involves this concentration on getting the agriculture and the food security equation right. And as the U.S., we cannot waver on this. We need sustained commitment, working in partnership year on year to eradicate economic and caloric famine. And as the U.S. grows here at home, and as we focus on the U.S. agenda of growth here at home and the development agenda overseas, it doesn't have to be a one or the other choice. It can actually be a both. We need both. And there's a lot of skepticism out there about why we need to focus on overseas instead of here at home. And there are views that American business is moving overseas and that we're leaving jobs at home, and that's quite the contrary. And since we've started opening markets since NAFTA and our WTO entry, actually Cargill has added 20,000 jobs here in the United States while continuing to grow overseas. We're now in 66 countries worldwide, and in the U.S. we have a very strong base here in the agriculture infrastructure. So I'm now paraphrasing. So let me just quickly tell you about Cargill and why we care about feeding people. And basically it's our business to feed people. We are in the food business, and we believe that access to food is a basic human right. And Cargill's business purpose is to be the worldwide leader in nourishing people. So we believe in approaching this in a comprehensive way, not just a private sector way, but having a comprehensive approach, sustainable production, efficient use of markets, open trade, research and development, aid, public-private partnerships. And as Cargill, we invest, we process, we trade, we distribute, we innovate, we research, and it's all part of the global ag agenda. So I often tell people I work for one of the largest development organizations in the world, and that is a private company called Cargill. If you've heard it before, I'm sorry I'm repeating it again. But where we invest, we work side by side with partners such as governments, NGOs. You just heard a great story about how Cargill has worked closely with TechnoServe in Mozambique. We partner with the World Food Program and CARE, all with the ultimate goal of securing long-term food security while securing our investments overseas. It's often said that, I think the word profit was mentioned, Greg, about companies making profits, and it's not a bad thing in our mind, because as we make profits in these countries and invest overseas, we're able to reinvest and re-partner and re-up our commitment to global food security. So this gets me to my concluding point, which I know I'm over time, which is the Feed the Future model is an excellent model for partnership. And it's the first time in my career here in Washington, and I know I don't look very old, thank you, that I have seen the intra-agency process come together around a laser-focused idea of food security. There's a lot of agencies here in the U.S. government that touch food, but this is the first time I've seen it come together in such a notable way, all working in the same direction. The targeted country-led initiatives are laser-focused on the critical areas where caloric and economic famine exist in the intersection, and Feed the Future makes aid effective. But what it also does is it works to multiply the impact of that aid by partnering with business and other stakeholders. So we've heard a lot of good testimonials today about Feed the Future, so I yield my time, and I want to leave you with a question, especially for those who work here on the Hill, and that is, so what can we do to make food security our job, as David Beckman would put it? And my answer is that we can all turn our focus and support toward the U.S. Ag Development and Food Security Agenda and make it your job, and it will create jobs here in the U.S. And David, if anyone brings this back to you, I hope you realize that Cargill's making it our job every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. My name is Jim McLaughlin, and I'm your friendly neighborhood pollster. And I feel a little bit out of place here because you have real policy people. And I get usually called, some people call me a pollster, but people that really know me, they say, there's the political hack. And trust me, that's a lot of my clients that will say that. But with that said, usually the first time when I meet a candidate, woman, man, whoever it might be, they'll say to me, they usually don't always know why they want to run, believe it or not. And I'll usually ask them the question, why do you want to run? Because they'll get asked that. It's something very important if you do decide to run. And what I tell them is, you want to look for the intersection between what's important to you and what's important to the voters. And I used to work for this little consumer products company. You might have heard of them, called Procter & Gamble. And with their marketing folks, a lot smarter than me, used to always say, what's the personal benefit? What's the personal benefit? And that's what we have to talk about here when it comes to this issue. And when you look at it, our personal benefits right now, from a polling perspective, from a public opinion perspective, are probably the greatest I've seen in my lifetime. We've been doing this stuff, I've been involved in this for about the last decade. We've done some really good research, not because of me, because I've been able to work with smart people like Tom Friedman, David Beckman, Ambassador Hall. And what we've found now is, and it won't come up at the top in terms of saying hunger and poverty issues, but when we ask folks how important it is to them, 85% will say hunger and poverty issues are important to them when they're deciding they vote for a candidate. When we tested back in the 2008 elections, we had 2/3 of the voters telling it was important in their vote for president and their vote for Congress. And now we're seeing those numbers go up even higher. This is one of the numbers that's a semi-off topic, but it's something I put out there. The last time we tested this, and this was back in 2007, before we had some real problems with the economy. One out of 4 American voters, and this is voters, not even adults, 1 out of 4 American voters were worried about that somebody in their family could go hungry. That's a lot of Republicans. It's a lot of Democrats. That's a lot of independents. And I will tell you, when I work with candidates on this issue, they will tell me they're always amazed how when they speak about it, how important the voters think it is. They'll also tell me how much press they tend to get when they talk about this issue, which, you know, we know all the politicians like press. But from a messaging standpoint, when you look at this, talk about a good, positive, optimistic message. And the reason why this is a good, positive, optimistic message, 70% are optimistic that we can help solve the issues of poverty and hunger in this country. Another 7 out of 10 say we've made great progress on this issue. And that's one of the things I'm telling you right now the voters aren't getting. They're not getting a lot of hope. You look at those last 2 issues that we have on there, and I'll tell you, there's really 3 reasons why you have that intersection with folks. What they're looking for, and the reason why this issue is important to them. Even though they may not mention at the top with the economy and jobs and even things like education, healthcare, the environment, et cetera, there's 3 main reasons, and they're 3 hugely important reasons. People get the economic message. I was talking to Derek before, a poultry farmer in Mozambique. Derek is telling me how he's been helped by American companies, how this creates jobs here in America. And that's what we need to do. We need to bring that message home. It helps our economy. It creates jobs. People understand this is a national security issue. You have economists from Paul Krugman to Larry Kudlow, totally different sides of the aisle, talking about how food prices, economic food security has caused the problems, has obviously caused the uproar in Egypt. And the last reason, and unfortunately here in politics, it's not always, they don't always do the right thing, but people believe they have a moral obligation to help solve this problem. And that matters to them, and it really does. And they understand the importance of that moral obligation. Thank you.
We're going to open up for questions, and I'll just throw the first one out. But I think one of the points Jim made, and it's true, and you hear this, and that is a hungry child anywhere in the world is a hungry child everywhere in the world. And that's a fact. And people, it resonates and it's real. And yes, there are economic and national security reasons, but what really causes us to feel proud about what our country does is when we step up and feed a hungry child. And there's a letter being released today signed by just about every NGO in this city that work around the world, basically making these points and calling on the Congress to maintain its longstanding bipartisan support for these efforts. I'll ask the first question, then we're really going to open up for panels to ask each other questions or anyone here. But we talked a bit, Greg and Debbie in particular, and others about the economic opportunities associated with Feed the Future and the partnership between the public and the private. And I'm wondering if you can mention or describe one specific example where it's good business, meaning a company generates a profit and at the same time helps generate economic opportunity for the small-scale farmer.
I think we have 1,400 facilities across the globe. I would say we do business in any of those economies where, again, they're in what we call sort of an unfortunate intersection between work and economic advancement. So anywhere we have investment, we are working with our communities and our stakeholders around that investment. We're not just building an investment. One example that I can give you is in Ghana, we're working with CARE, we're also working with CARE in India. I've personally been to India to see these projects, but I'll take the case of Ghana in particular, where we're working on farmer field schools and training 10,000 farmers on best practices in production of cocoa, which is their livelihood because it is their how they make their income. So we're working in partnership with the Gates Foundation, CARE, and others to assure that we're able to have a sustainable supply of cocoa, but at the same time, their farmers are able to have a sustainable business. That's one example.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing here in terms of the sweet potato, which is a partial fund by the USA, it's a type of project that we've had over the years where farmers are able to increase their own incomes, and as you can see from the Blues building a better house, and that it fosters for her and her economy benefits. And as we try to say in many of our programming, that as wealth grows internationally, so does wealth grow, whether it's the export of tractors. I know there's some things that we're doing now, looking at different projects with General here and others, with some other major consumer companies that we think will result in benefits. I know that particularly the Go Food program, and Alan's here, there's a lot of effort to make better nutrition programs, which results in income for a private company around that product, and benefits children with a more nutritious product. So,
for us, and again, you mentioned that partnership that is going on because we started with the nations that have been made with the support of that concern. For us, it's a partnership that is getting the private companies to have profits and also to have small borders to get economic improvement. Because when we have these private companies supported through the support that is coming from the head, we have them getting their profit, but also the integrated small borders. And these are getting improved in their lives, and they are getting more and more involved in the poultry industry. And also, it's one of the partnerships for me that is working well because also the government side, the public sector is involved in giving the support that is needed in terms of improving all the legal aspects, the fiscal aspect that are involved in the industry. For me, it's the partnership that is very well.
Are there any
And it's causing also increase in price. Not to mention the fact that the land that could go to food production is being used now increasingly in producing biofuel, fuel raw products. I think that question is come up frequently. From our perspective, I don't know if there's a clear answer on the size of the impact that ethanol production has on global prices. I think if you look at Krugman's article today, one of these points out is that in fact, price rises that we're looking at right now will be better than anything else. Well, he does acknowledge that there is some impact. Overall, there are a variety of issues that lead to rises in prices. Price of transportation and the price of oil itself, which is of course still what we use in transport things. I know if I were speaking to my colleagues who do the piece, when we look at what we're able to buy now, I mean, our purchasing price goes down because the price of oil keeps going up. So while I think we can acknowledge that there is an impact, I'm not sure that you can isolate that as the impact on the world food prices.
Bruce? If you can state your name and the organization.
Bruce White, Catholic Relief Services. I'm just curious, this is for Mr. Gottman. How closely are the successes of Feed the Future tied with First Millennium Development Goals in the target countries, target countries? And when do you think we should be able to start looking for results to show in the national indicators?
We don't yet have our 11 budget, and the 10 months just arrived, and as you know, the budget, in fact, the real size of this initiative is not contained in the 10 budget. But nevertheless, I think that, when I look at some examples, not just from what just happened, but if I look at what happened with sweet potatoes, and I look at a couple of other things, I do think that we are, and particularly like if you look at Guatemala, in the target areas, we've already seen a reduction in undernutrition in those target areas by around 25, 26, 27%. So just that in the last few years, you can see that if we focus on it, we can have an impact. I can't say exactly when that will happen, but I think in some of the larger countries that we help to target, I think. Let me just step back for a second. I mean, one of the things we really want to do in this programming initiative is to not be all things to all people. The plan is that we're not going to have 20 value chains. For instance, in Senegal, the original plan was called for 20 different value chains, and that's not where we're going to go with our program. We're trying to look for where we can have the biggest impact, and so that we can stay focused on it. So. Our hope is certainly we would love to see a place like Ghana, which is already well on its way to meet those MDG goals in poverty. And we would like to be able to support them so they can be experts. And one of the reasons we'd like to target a country like Ghana is because it's where you can get an immediate impact and also show, I think, how the program can be successful. So that's what we're looking at, and we again, it's to try to stay as focused as we can, so that we use the resources as well as
Blake?
Blake Phillips, here. This is for Mr. McLaughlin. I appreciate the polling information and people ranking poverty high and addressing that in a positive attitude, 70%, but I was just wondering how you suggest, since we're here on the Hill, while we're saying our own works advocate, especially families and housing and staff, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect with that kind of support, and then foreign aid. So you've seen the polls, even yesterday, the New York Times, they keep talking about foreign aid, they don't think that the general public supports it, so.
And you know what? It's one of those things where it doesn't matter whether it's foreign aid, whether it's even now, even to some extent in the entitlement program. People are looking for reform. They want to see new solutions. You know, Greg used the board earlier before we said transparency, and that's what folks are looking for. And again, you want to look for that intersection. How do we get to a fight about foreign aid? What I would talk about, what you're better off talking about, is the things that really matter to people, just what they have up here. Talk about how this can help create the economy, and how it can help create jobs, how it can help improve the economy, how it can help grow our economy. One of the great things now is, and I'll tell you, the biggest mistake political people ever do is they underestimate the intelligence of the American people. On so many issues, and especially an issue like this, the people, public opinion, are ahead of politicians. And even older folks that aren't as technologically savvy as younger folks are, they understand with the click of a mouse, we can trade with Tanzania, we can trade with, and they're looking for things, not necessarily fair trade, they're looking for, what they're looking for more is fair trade as opposed to free trade. And they understand how that grows the economy. So you want to talk about how there's reform, there's transparency, we have programs that are working. Talk about how this helps make us more safe, secure, careful, and also talk about the economic benefits of it.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you all could expand on the opportunities that have been afterwards in that connection, building relationships with these countries. Do we actually see connections between the U.S. and countries that's going to need to develop even after it's
You want to start, Beverly?
One of the clearest examples of one of sort of seeing floors right now would be our relationship with South Korea and the aid that went into South Korea to work with them on their development agenda. And now you can see a difference between sort of South Korea and North Korea in terms of opening to a relationship with the global economy, allowing inflow of capital, inflow of ideas, trade to happen. To a point that they are quite an economic powerhouse in the region. And we're seeing with a free trade agreement between the United States and South Korea, which I think is a manifestation of that relationship over time. And not only have we taken it from development ties, we're now looking to take this relationship to stronger commercial ties, which will translate into greater economic growth here in the United States. It's the most commercially meaningful free trade agreement out there. So that would be an example that I would provide. I don't know if my colleagues would have any others.
Well, I think in the same vein, South Korea is really a classic model when we look at what we put in the result of Thailand, I think, would be another country you look at where tremendous amount of American development money in there, and the Thai economy is a very, very powerful economy. Even in the development of the rice economy, it's now the leading producer of rice, along with Vietnam. And there's a lot of American development, and it's also going to be Vietnam, and you see what kind of production is capable of. So there's a real benefit there that involves for American companies to do business there, particularly in Thailand. I had a chance to go there some years ago. There are a lot of American companies in business. And so as our development money and help boost that economy, open up markets for our business. Latin America, I think. I mean, you get in Latin America, you go to Bolivia or Peru or wherever you go, the places you will see tremendous amounts of American business and more of the economies develop. The great opportunity there is for us to get that underneath. If I could, and I just wanted to add one more thing that's related to this.
Further question about what kinds of projects we've seen succeed. I want to just point out something from Rwanda, the ambassador is here. In southern Rwanda, there's a long-term coffee program that Texas A&M has been involved in for many years. Really that coffee project. And the way that has produced not just profits where American companies like Green Mountain come in and buy it, but if you look at what the country's done, they have for university down there offers adult education now. For many of the people that are involved in that, they have world-class coffee tasters that have been developed from down there. And that project is really helping drive the economy for part of Southern Rwanda. So and I said we owe particularly the government to recognize the opportunities that we have.
Three months about that to the main number one. Recently, Cargill now has the second one is president of Cargill, the rest of the world is probably New Zealand, right here in the United States. And that's growing dramatically in the last few years, and increased jobs here in the United States. Secondly, the program that we discussed, the poultry program, began after an investment, I believe, by Tyson's in Brazil, which helped to produce a huge production facility, and the overproduction ended up in Dubai. The chicken that was in Dubai ended up in Durban. The chicken that is in Durban ended up in Tanzania, growing Tanship, in Indians growing Tanship, and in Mozambique growing those industries. Now, you may not have heard there's been a negative impact on license for that because we got in front of the power curve, proposed to USDA that we do something about that before it becomes a nightmare for our businesses overseas. We got in front of the business and said, no, this is in your interest and the interest of your shareholders, that we go out there and replace this model, which is not sustainable, doesn't work, and the business person in the right mind would suggest that it is good, and let's do one that creates jobs for everyone in a shape and manner. And the third thing I would add is South Korea is not only a brilliant model of how they developed into this system of support, but how they are paying it forward again. Recently, Tanzania and South Korea signed an agreement which South Korea is going to take on USAID IT models to develop a huge agricultural development business on the Rufiji River, where farming has fallen into farming that's called misuse. And this is creating investment of $50 to $100 million in Tanzania. It won't be without its problems. It will require us to come with really good solutions for land management, but it's sustainable.
I have questions from the webinar as well. First is an easy one for Greg, and that is, how can U.S. civil society organizations be involved in Feed the Future? And we know that they're very involved, so this is an easy one for you.
Right. Well, I know some are already involved, but I think what's important is that at USAID we've an initiative we have which is on called USAID Forward, which is designed to reduce some of our procurement practices, which is designed to target local civil society groups to broaden the way that we fund. And as I said earlier, we understand that this is not just an initiative about economic growth. This is an initiative about economic growth and equity. And so we know how important the NGOs have been in making sure that services go down to those that are most vulnerable. So we have been partners with civil society for years, and just because we have a new focus on business aspects of economic growth does not mean that we will not continue to engage with our traditional partners.
Regarding the Feed the Future honoring and evaluations for retention, what role do you see environmental and health indicators playing in agricultural development in the future?
The which indicators?
Environmental and health-oriented indicators, in an agricultural program, we talk about
Yeah.
wages.
Yeah.
And that's something we're very interested in.
Okay. I can't see because of this. If I could, I could see right here. Just to answer your question, in terms of, we developed a framework, which I think is actually going to be posted on our website in about 2 weeks. The importance of it is it has 54 different indicators. It doesn't mean everybody reports on all 54, but there's some basic ones that we want people to report on, under nutrition being one of those. But if you look at all those indicators, they try to cover the, I wouldn't say the whole waterfront, but most of it in terms of the different things that we're going to look at. And we do have a component within our office that's growing that deals with environmental issues. And so I think if you take a look at some of those indicators, you'll see that there's environmental health will be a concern, because what we're trying to do is develop, as I said, a comprehensive view of the way to do this. You know, if we're going to look at farming, we want to look at sustainable farming, which means good land practices. Conservation farming is something, of course, many people here have heard about, but it is one of those things that you look at it and you say, that's environmental health for everybody. And so, for everybody concerned with the growth of those farms. So, yes, it is something that we're going to look at, and if you take a look at that and you see that there are other things you might think about, then we would certainly encourage people to come back to us and say, you know, take a look at this. Maybe this is a better indicator, a better projection. So, thanks for the question.
And I'll just say this on Greg's behalf, they have now put the newest version of the indicators up on the website for everyone to look at, to comment on. I can say, having served in the executive branch in this institution and in other places, this is the most transparent, engaging process I've ever had the pleasure to participate in from almost 2 years ago to the present day. It's, I think, now my real honor to introduce the ambassador, Ambassador Camonio, who is the ambassador to the United States, but also the non-resident ambassador to Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. It's a real honor to have you here. And, you know, Rwanda is such a key country in the whole Feed the Future strategy and really on the cutting edge of so many things that we're looking to achieve. So thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you very much. It's always my pleasure to be given this opportunity to address this distinguished audience and share the panel with very accomplished individuals with huge responsibilities to guide us through this important process. First and foremost, let me take this opportunity on behalf of my government and my colleagues who are here from different diplomatic missions in Washington to thank the government of the United States and the Congress for the support that have been provided in coming up with different initiatives to help the African continent and the other countries around the globe to address this serious problem, which is very much related to security issues, as it has been mentioned. Feed the Future Initiative is a program that I think it's high time for all of us to invest and support. When you look at the components under this program, starting with increasing the trade activity, expanding trade, deepening the capabilities within the global population, and supporting the nutrition for children, and many other aspects of this program. You all know the importance of these programs in case we have already heard about programs. What I would want to share with you, especially the last speaker, is what has been mentioned by all speakers. How do we generate capability in many different countries to be able to come up with a plan that is owned by the civil society and the private sector within specific locations? Because we have done a lot in the past. We have invested a lot. We have come up with different programs. But we still face the challenges that we have been discussing. Can we take a minute or two and reflect on what we have done in the past and where we have going wrong. And I think the initiative to the future is trying to address those structural problems that we've been facing in the past. To the extent that, for instance, in our case, when you look at the programs that were created under the Academy, are basically addressing those problems that we have been facing and that have become innovative in terms of implementing the programs that are made to address the issue of food security. I should say that during the presentation, when we were before, it came out clear that we already know the problems that we are facing. And we know why we should step up our efforts to address those problems. And we already know, based on the programs that are developed in different countries, including the African continent, to look at it, we already know what we need in terms of addressing those problems. I think what's lacking is how do we increase our abilities in terms of implementation of those programs to address the issues that we already know, and we already know why we have to address these problems. When the President of the United States, through G20, announced the support to food security, they asked different countries to come up with the program so that they can access the resources that were earmarked for that program. I think it was somehow difficult to even understand what are the priorities from these different countries. And I think Rwanda was one of the first countries to access those resources because we had already positioned ourselves in terms of defining our priorities in the program and how we need the resources. So we came to Rwanda today, and other countries are, I'm sure, which are very looking at the programs. If we come to Rwanda, we will not spend a day discussing what we should do or what we should do. If we come to Rwanda today, we shall give you a program that is costed, that shows where we need resources. And if we feel that you want to go into market development, you want to go into better education, if you want to go into supply chain programs, we can show you every component, what's required, and how you want to achieve that. And I think that's very important for all of us to be able to develop those tools, have them in place, and then we continue to lead our partners to be able to raise resources to implement those programs. And I think the innovation in this process is that we are not going to rely on public resources. We cannot have all 50 or more countries that are facing those challenges to come to the US or Korea or another country to say we need 200 million to implement a program. It may not be sustainable. We may not be able to raise that much, as much as we appreciate the gesture and the support that this country is doing. But I'm very sure it cannot address the problems that we have in the course of the parts of the world. Then the innovation is to bring the private sector to come into the play. How do we raise the private funds to come into the business? As long as we are clearly defining how these programs are going to be implemented, as long as that's mentioned, as long as we are able to show that people can make money, can make profit through this process, at the same time addressing the challenges, then the private sector will completely affect the process. If it remains the public problem, the public issue, the problem not going to see the private years coming to the money. What about the financial institutions? How do we involve the civil society to be part of this process? Those are the issues that we should go back home thinking about, reflecting on those, and then once we agree on how to form the public-private partnership on those sides, how do we bring in the civil society? How do we make sure that the processes are owned by people on the ground rather than designing a program from the central level and telling what to do? I think that is the thing that has been lacking in this whole process. And I'm sure this audience and the many experts who are here should help us to narrow down the discussion. And our conversation should be, our discourse should be towards that direction of ensuring that mobilizing resources from private and public, but also ensuring that the processes are owned by the people and the local governments. In our case, since 2000, we stopped designing programs at the central level. It's done from the population, assisted by the local communities, by involving the civil society, and the programs are presented to the government. We, as we mentioned, we have a lot of programs that have been very successful, especially in the coffee sector. Today, we have the first coffee shop from the African continent that is selling coffee, growing coffee here in Washington, in the first street. Another is up and running in New York. The next month it's going to be open in Boston. All through the public web participant will be able to achieve that. So I'm going to end my remarks by emphasizing the fact that we need to engage the private sector and society and make sure that this process can go by people, and if we reach one of the pilots, others are going to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, sir. I think just to sum up, if we can, very quickly, and be on time, is really what I think we're hearing from everyone is that, yes, we do need to address immediate needs, but what this is all about, I think the future is all about, in many respects, is how do we go from aid recipient to actually being a trade and a strategic partner? How do we get to a point where we no longer have to provide aid because we're trading economically, where there is economic development in these countries? It is a very exciting moment, and it's a new way of doing business. It's an intelligent way of doing business. But the fact is, as Greg said, this is not going to happen overnight. It's a long-term effort, which means we all have to be committed for the long haul. All of us, like Blake and Bruce and others, we need to be up here reminding folks and helping bring the data to people here up on the Hill to understand what's going on. We need our good friends and colleagues from the Hill to be committed to this for the long haul, because it won't happen overnight, but it is an incredibly exciting effort that once again is being embraced by the entire world, both within countries like Rwanda, to the halls of the Brussels and the European Union and throughout the world. It's an incredibly exciting moment, and I think we can be very proud of what our government is doing in our work around the world. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to getting together with you again very soon. Thank you.